Hi, and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javan.
And I'm Guff.
Guff, today I want to throw some things at you about the 50th anniversary edition, or what they're calling D&D, not next, it's One D&D now, I believe is what it's called.
Yep.
Effectively a 5.5.
Yeah.
You haven't looked into this hardly at all, right?
No, not since the OGL crisis, no.
Yeah, we both kind of like swore off D&D for a while.
Yeah.
And like we'd been declining kind of anyways.
Right,
Like
yeah.
we played 5th edition almost
Since-
10 years.
Yeah.
If not more than 10 years.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
I did D&D Next playtesting, and I
Right.
think, did you do some of that too?
We did. No. Yes, we did.
Yeah, because they had a few adventures that came out with it and all
Yep.
that. So we have extensive knowledge, and I played just a few years prior to that. I was playing 4th edition, 2nd edition, 1st edition, and you've played since
Yeah, since 80s,
80s.
since Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, essentially. I mean, I played some basic, but I can't really.
And I have played 3, 5. Not super big on those. But suffice to say, between the two of us, we probably have 40 years D&D experience.
I have that many.
Okay, so between the two of us,
I've been playing, since the 80s, so.
yeah, so between the two of us, we have at least 40 years.
Yeah, at least 40 years, yeah. Yeah, at least 40 years, yeah.
So we'll say 50.
Yep, that works.
Not that gives us any more qualifications
No.
than anybody else, but we also play a lot of different games, and on this podcast, we try to look at things in different ways. So I recently just finally sat down and powered through Baldur's Gate 3, and it kind of reignited my interest in D&D. And so,
That's
coinciding with that, surprisingly, or not unsurprisingly, we'll say, Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins did an interview on D&D's YouTube page.
right.
Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins being kind of I like to think of them as the masterminds behind D&D at Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, I would agree.
And-
It sounds like they pretty much are the guys who you want to listen to.
Yeah, and I think Jeremy Crawford was a lead design on a lot of things in 5th edition. He kind of took the reins as or bore the mantle of the public face of game design of 5th edition's Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
I think that's safe to say.
Yeah, I would say that's safe.
On the flip side of that, Chris Perkins is honestly just I like to think of him as a treasured relic
Right.
of D&D at this point.
He's kind of just been around.
Like, in my opinion, in the Pantheon, Perkins is up there as like one of the greatest DMs, one of the greatest contributors to D&D of all time.
Right.
That's maybe me fanboying a little bit or whatever, but
Well,
I
mean,
don't care.
he doesn't really get into the politics of it all. He just loves the game. Yeah, he doesn't just get into the politics. He just loves the game. So
Yeah,
I mean-
and that's what you want with someone, and that's a healthy person to have in the scene.
Yeah.
During all of this, right? So, Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford do this interview with D&D Beyond, and I want to pitch to you some of the things that they talked about in this handbook,
okay,
the New Player's Handbook. So, the New Player's Handbook is the largest player's handbook ever printed. It's like the 3 books together, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, and the Player's Handbook,
yep,
are over 1,000 pages long.
right,
And this is one of the few times I think the argument to be made of 3 books actually makes sense.
right,
It's unfortunate for the consumer, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, why do I need to buy a book that has a DM section if I'm not a DM?
right. Yeah, no,
Why do I care?
yeah, you shouldn't have to.
Yeah. And so the ability to pick and choose is pretty important. I'm not going to get into the shady business practices or the OGL scandal. We cover that plenty on this channel. I want to try look at this episode as a beacon of hope, and maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel for the actual game mechanics and the game edition of One D&D.
Right, yeah,
I want to try to frame it in a positive light.
right.
That being said, let's cover some of it.
All right.
I don't have a prompt for this, and I want to preface it by saying I'm not an expert on what they've talked about. I haven't followed every single note of the changes or patch notes, if you will.
Right.
But I have watched quite a few of the videos, and I think I have a general idea of the vibe and the ideas behind what they're trying to do. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, or I don't. You could just,
Or you're just blowing hot air up our ass.
Yep. Or you guys can just crucify me in the comments. We'll see.
That could work. We could do that. I'll start.
Yeah. Good.
I'll get my friends in. Wait, not any friends. Okay. Well,
It'll be all right.
you want to crucify yourself?
Maybe.
Okay.
It'll be kinda hard.
That way I can say I have one person helping me.
Yeah, that's true. I could do that. Anyways, so let's start with the player's handbook. One of the initial things that jumped out to me, I'm going to kind of bounce all around with this. There's 12 classes.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure they kept the same 12 classes.
Yeah, I think I did read that. I don't think anything new.
There's now 4 subclasses for every class.
Right.
So in 5th edition, we had 3 for every class. And they've carried over most of the same subclasses.
Yep.
But they've also added a psionic option now for every class.
Okay.
Or the psionic equivalent.
Right.
Now, it's using psionics in the way that 5th edition uses psionics.
Right, not in old school.
And it's really interesting because when they were talking about it, Crawford and Perkins were saying they wanted 5th edition to have psionics, like a robust psionic system.
Right.
But they never had the time to do it.
Yeah.
Like, to put it in the framework of the game.
Well, that's a pretty big subsystem. Like, if you do it wrong, it just breaks everything.
And I think the idea of, like, a once per short rest, once per long rest, like, free use of an ability for psionics, I don't think that's a horrible design choice.
Right.
But moving forward, so basically one of the jokes going around is that the great old one, Warlock, finally gets to bring all his friends.
Right. There you go. Exactly.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, they have a psionic assassin in the thief class that is basically the equivalent of what the arcane trickster is to the thief.
Right.
You know, like the arcane trickster's essentially a thief, but like with a little bit of magic flair.
Right.
The psionic thief is to the assassin.
Right.
It's the killer with a little bit of magic flair.
Okay.
Like the Eldritch Knight equivalent, right? So in the player's handbook with the new subclasses, what they've also done too is they've retooled a lot of the subclasses. Some of the more interesting design things they've done is for like Arcane Trickster and Eldritch Knight. They have removed schools of magic restrictions.
Oh.
For spells.
Okay.
Which is a smart design choice, I feel, because you were never really incentivized to play an Eldritch Knight, mechanically speaking. Simply due to the fact that like you could build a better Eldritch Knight by multi-classing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
right.
that's one of the issues of like, why would I hinder myself and be a suboptimal choice when I could just do it better by doing something else?
Yeah, I actually played an Eldritch Knight for a while. Well, quite a while. I played probably all the way to 15th or 16th level or whatever it was. And the power crit, I don't do a lot of multi-class just because I like the purity idea. Unfortunately, with 5th ed, at least up to this point, you almost have to if you want to play in the big boy leagues. Once you start if you don't start multi-classing at some point, the power creep just dies. You just flatline really bad.
You lose any ability to scale.
Yeah, you're just done. You're just like, okay, so I'm a fighter, 16th level fighter, sure. I mean, if someone wants to stand next to you and smash you, you're fine. Like, if you want to fight a golem, you're probably doing okay. But when you open a monster manual or you look at any of the monsters, there's not many of them that just stand in front of you and want to fight you. And as an Eldritch Knight, sure, you cast spells and stuff, but they don't cast spells as good of a wizard or a cleric or a priest or any of the other ones.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues there is, in a game like 5th edition, where it's based on the Die 20 modern system of 3.0, like it's an evolution of that, where it's a game of modifiers and just plus bonuses based on every even digit.
Right.
You end up with this system of, it's almost like a nuclear arms race, where like you could have an 18 strength, that's great, awesome, but like if you don't have like a 16 or higher starting, you kind of feel like you're not competing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so now, like as an Eldritch Knight, if you have like, you want a high strength, you want, because you're, or a high dex.
Yep.
And then you want a high constitution because you are a fighter ultimately. You're not a pure caster.
Right.
And so now your third most important stat, which if we look at a standard array is 13, 15, and 12, you have a 12 in your intelligence to start the game.
Right.
Which means your saving throw is like, what, proficiency bonus plus intelligence plus 8?
Yeah, I think so.
So your starting proficiency bonus is 2. So you have an 11 DC.
Right.
That means someone without any bonus is fine 50% of the time.
Right.
They're just going to ignore whatever you're throwing at them.
Yeah.
That feels really bad.
That does.
So, like, you're not even incentivized to cast spells then. You're just incentivized to swing with your higher stat.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the fundamental issues of, like, limiting an Eldritch Knight like that. Like, putting limitations on him. Because if you limit him to only evocation spells.
Right.
Well, why is he going to choose a spell that's going to deal damage when he can just hit someone with his sword and do more?
Right.
But if you give the Eldritch Knight access to, like, abjuration to ward themselves and give them extra armor class, well, that's really useful.
Right.
And so that design philosophy of, like, maybe taking off the restrictions, the flavor restrictions, so to speak,
right,
and making them more useful is better and more healthy. And I think it is.
What class, what choices did the Eldritch Knight have? Do you remember? I don't remember.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I don't think there was a lot of enchantment choices either.
I know Arcane Trickster had quite a few.
Because I know, like, I wish we could have had spells. I don't think spells that would either, give you more range on your melee attacks, or spells that you could give you buffs on your melee attacks, like in chain. Like, I think there might have been at high level you could get something that would change your attack from, say, piercing to force. But I mean, by that point, you're fighting things that doesn't really matter at that point.
Mm-hmm. So the limitation on Schools of Magic for Eldritch Knight was you only got to pick 2 of the 8 Schools of Magic.
Right. Okay. That's what it was.
And the choices were Abjuration or Evocation.
Okay.
And that was it.
So yeah.
But like giving Divination to an Eldritch Knight, maybe like, well, True Strike's supposed to be better now too.
Right.
Which True Strike, there's a lot of weird design choices that ended up pretty bad for the fighters. Anyways, long story short, yeah. So Eldritch Knight has had some nice bonuses. Champion was another fighter class that kind of felt like, basically, if you weren't playing a Battle Master, you felt like you were falling behind in the late game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because inherently, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons was an action economy game.
Yep.
When you break it down, if you can do more things on the turn, more meaningful things, you're just gonna win combats.
Yeah.
And that's why the players typically scale so much better than monsters.
Yeah.
And why you can't just run a single monster versus 5 players.
Right.
Because unless that monster has 5 things to do on every turn, the players will win.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yep.
And the only agency a monster has to even compete then is to, like, kill a player outright right away with a gotcha.
Right.
And then now it's still got to fight 4 players, so it's still going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, if you play it by the rules, that's how that works.
So what they've done is they've taken some of the weaker classes and they've buffed them, which that is something we've talked about extensively on this channel, of buffing something that is unplayable. Or not unplayable, but like, because everything's playable, right?
Right.
But like giving players more incentive to choose that and more rewards for actually going down that path.
Yeah.
It's like the whole argument of the 1st edition Barbarian. Yeah, you're pretty badass, but you're paying for it because your XP grind is just awful.
Just terrible, yeah.
So in the end, is it really worth it when you could have been a 20th level wizard?
Yeah, or even a 20th level fighter by that point.
Right.
and got to wear armor.
Yeah. So another cool thing they did is they introduced something called weapon masteries. And from my understanding, these weapon masteries kind of go for the spirit of old D&D with like specialization.
Yep.
And they give you just different options for different weapons. Like it might incentivize you to actually use something other than, I don't know, a 2d6 damage maul.
Right.
Right. Like
instead of just using the biggest damage one, you might use some other stuff.
Yeah. And like it's funny because they had some rules for this in 5th edition prior, where like if you had a net and a trident, you could do special things or like trip attacks. There was some of that already in 5th ed.
Right.
But it was only for like select few. And basically you're always incentivized to just go bigger damage number.
I won't lie, that was one of the biggest like disappointments when I played 5th ed, because I hadn't played any 3.5, but I had played 3 and 3.5 in Neverwinter Nights. So I was familiar with the rule set, the power rule set, and in 3 and 3.5 they had a lot of weapon specialization abilities like cleave.
Mm-hmm.
Like when 5th ed came out and there was no cleave, I'm like, why? Like I understand that was a power thing, but it also made the fighter that was a specific, like, I'm just going to be an axe fighter. That's all I do. Or just even a great sword, whatever. A great weapon fighter. Generally, that was cleave was for great weapons. That was gone. Like, it's just gone. Like,
so,
what?
Yeah. So, and it's really interesting because Baldur's Gate 3, I know we keep going back to this, but they did a really good job of, like, giving you the options to do the fancy things.
Yep.
But also saying, hey, you can only do this once per short rest.
Yeah.
Or once per combat.
Yep. Once per yeah, whatever. Yep.
And that's totally cool. Because now you don't have a character that's just cleaving and killing everything all the time. You actually have, like, some sort of balance.
Well, I think cleave in 3, you only got to cleave, I think, if you actually, I don't know, was it a crit? Or killed the monster you were fighting.
And it spilled the damage over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember something like that, but I think you had to clear it. Or, no, it was, oh God, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I'm fairly certain it was like you roll, and then if you have damage left over and you still hit after like subtracting 5 from your hit roll.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
There was
exactly,
a weird calculation, but like it was kind of hard to do until you got to later levels.
But I mean, it comes back to that idea that only the Battle Master had anything that was even near that
useful, right?
Like you would think that is kind of the epitome of a fighter, is the guy who can push, shove, cleave. He can choose some of those abilities to make himself more useful, because literally as a fighter, when you get up high levels, and I know I played one to 16th level from 0, I mean 1 to 16, straight up grinded my ass all the way up there. That was horrible because I was playing with a rogue, I was playing with a warlock, and a wizard. All of them are very useful in almost every situation. You get a bunch of range stuff. Every one of those have range something.
Well,
oh, sure, I do. I got a bow. I can shoot my bow.
Or like the idea of...
Wow.
Not to interrupt, but like the idea of like a sorcerer being a better melee fighter than a fighter.
Yeah.
Because of one cantrip.
Right, yeah. No, that's just dumb. That's just dumb.
It's like, why am I even incentivized to play a fighter?
No, I did it just out of pure principle.
Yeah, and so what they ended up doing was I think fighters get more weapon masteries and stuff like that.
I see
They
that.
just made fighters more able to participate in the action economy.
Yeah.
And that is honestly all fighters needed.
Yeah, no, they
because they are a solid class, but they just fall behind in ability to do things.
Yeah, they do. It's kind of like the barbarian. Mm-hmm. You go out, you swing, you do huge amounts of damage. You can take huge amounts of damage, but you get like 2 swings and you're done.
Yep.
Okay, I'll just watch the rest of the fight. Then you get the wizard who's like, well, I'm going to cast this, and then I have this precast, so I'm going to do this, and all of a sudden I'm summoning giant, whatever, and 20 minutes later you're done. It's like, okay.
Yeah, and like the other thing that was really crazy about 5th ed, and I don't know how many people experienced this, but like the summoning spells,
right,
super busted.
Yeah. Because
now all of a sudden your action economy.
Oh yeah.
Of getting one more person in your party, basically, with like a minor earth elemental or just a normal earth elemental. Like, even if they're not doing anything, that's still HP the enemy has to chew through.
Yeah.
and one more attack you get every round.
I will. I'll back you up on that because I played a druid after my fighter died because he did die. Well, technically he didn't die, but he got taken out of the game. And so then I'm like, okay, the guy's like, well, you need to make a new player to join this campaign because we're almost done, and I don't want you not to be part of it. I said, okay. So I'm like, okay, I have a druid. I had another campaign. We'll just take out some of the items that were made for that campaign. We'll just kind of generic druid this guy in. Well, then I realized summoning Fae. That, like, summoning, like you said, is broken as hell. You summon, say, 5 pixies, for instance, and now they can make 5 people invisible, or they can do all kinds of just shenanigans, and they're almost untouchable as far as things go. They're just like
they're super hard to hit.
They're hard to deal with,
and like that's the other thing too is like it's a reaction.
They cast fly, so now all of a sudden your whole party can fly pretty much at will because you just tell the pixies make us fly, and guess what they do? They make you fly. It's like, oh my gosh. I'm glad I didn't play the druid the whole time, to be fair, because I probably would have abused the crap out of that from day one once I realized it.
Yeah, and druid is one of the most recent ones they released. I haven't watched it yet.
Yep.
But again, this is just kind of my reflections and thoughts on the first week of releases,
right?
Which they talked about a lot of the martial classes and stuff. Ranger is the most just freshest one they did. It was like a few hours ago.
Yeah,
and I'm super excited to.
I'm glad they did that because I think that if there was reasons where people didn't want to play 5th Ed was literally because their melee classes didn't feel like they were competing with the warlock and the wizard or the sorcerer,
and honestly,
or even the bard for that matter.
This hurts me to say because I love 2nd and 1st edition so much.
Yep.
But the magic system of 5th edition gave casters so much agency and so much ability without having to work around the weird loopholes.
Right.
Like, just the base magic system of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. You can make an argument for, like, oh, there's no wish that's really good, or you have to alter wish or whatever. Whatever. You have to alter stuff in every edition if you really want what you want. But, like, just the baseline, like, the cantrip systems, the way you have spell slots just like you did in, it almost feels like 2nd edition, but with the cantrips of, like, 3rd edition.
Right.
It's just so well done.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they dropped the ball. Like it's like they did fighter right away and started designing everything and made like fighter, ranger, rogue, and like, yeah, this is cool. And then they got to spells and they're like, okay, we learned all this, let's make this even better.
Right.
And it's like they never revisited the fighter.
Yeah, the melee class just got forgot that for
and
a
they
while.
just kind of got like left behind. And then all the melee classes that got released after in like Xanathar's Tasha's felt pretty solid. They're like, okay, these are good.
Yep.
But your base fighter was just like,
yeah, it's like the ranger too.
Oh, dude, they didn't
like they just didn't love the ranger at all.
And like, and like dual wielding was another thing. I get it. Dual wielding's hard to balance,
right?
But if I'm building a dual wielding character, give me an incentive to make a dual wielding character.
Yeah.
Like, give me any incentive, please.
Yeah. No, that's
because,
how it should be.
Like, a bonus action to just swing once with my offhand, like,
yeah, you gotta waste your bonus action to do it too.
Like,
which really sucks.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
Like, and again, this isn't me trying to redesign D&D. This is not what we're talking about here.
No.
But if they had found a way to make dual wielding work within the action economy of 5th Ed, Ranger would have been, make dual wielding specific to Ranger.
Yep.
Which originally in 2nd edition it was.
Right.
You know, if you wanted to dual wield, you look way back in D&D's history, dual wielding was like Rangers and fighters.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's pretty. Yeah. Yeah. No.
Because Rangers got to ignore the penalties.
Yep.
For fighting with 2 weapons. Normally you had to have super high dex. Rangers just got to like just do it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why they were always stuck with like light armor, and they could wear medium armor, but then they'd start taking negatives and all that sort of stuff. It's just it felt like the essence of Ranger got flipped and just done dirty.
Yeah, I think they missed out on a whole lot with dual wielding or 2 weapon wielding or 2 weapon handling. I think they could have just stuck with some of the old stuff that they had. Like, or they were worried, okay, well, the fighter, whatever is going to get too melee. But that's kind of what these guys do. They're melee fighters. If you're worried about it, just have the guy with a shield be able to hit with the shield too. Like,
which they did some of that too.
Right.
Or like the shield, you lean into it and all this. Like dueling. Dueling's a great example. Right. You get the dueling benefit even if you have a shield.
Right.
Okay, cool. So you could go damage, extra, just 2 extra damage. That adds up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or you get the defensive style where you get +2 to your dex saving throws against AoE effects. Also, really freaking good, turns out. Or where you can I think doesn't the paladin have a defensive style where they can use their reaction to increase an ally's AC within 5 feet of them?
I think so. I think
something
so.
like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's brilliant.
Right.
Awesome. Great design. Give me more of that.
Yeah, I think that's what they're doing with Weapon Mastery. Is they're giving you more of that little.
Yeah, they're giving you more.
They're going down the right road,
and that's what they needed.
Yep.
They just needed to give you something to be more impactful on your turn.
Yep.
And with the 2-weapon fighting, if they did something as simple as the number of extra attacks you get is equal to the extra attacks you get from your normal attack.
Right.
Or hell, go back to an old table where it's like a 3/2 or whatever.
Yeah, I think, no, I agree. I think they were worried that, a guy with dual wielding is going to get 3 attacks with each side. Well, no, I mean, the action economy is really important. I think we talked about Baldur's Gate. That's a very good idea. I know, my paladin that I played in Baldur's Gate, or am playing, he literally can use the reaction to shield block, or when I'm in the fight, I can use a reaction to, or not use, I can use a bonus action or whatever to use a shield to smash something, and then use my one attack. But I'm using up my action economy at that point.
Yeah,
I can choose to either whack or whack, depending on how I want to do it.
Right, you're actually incentivized to use all of your actions for useful things, rather than just extra whatever.
Yeah, I love the idea that, I guess.
Options. It's all about options.
Yeah, I mean, there's other systems that use it, and I won't name them because we're talking about D&D, but there's other systems that have action points, and you have 3, 4, 5, whatever the system is, and you can choose to use them however you want. And I like that idea. It's almost kind of what they're doing with this mastery thing. So giving you an option to go, okay, I have 2 attacks this round. I can use one as a cleave, and that burns up one of my action points, or I can use one as a block, and then a nick or a push or whatever, but I'm using up my action economy, but the way I want to, not the way the game's forcing me to.
Okay, one last thing I want to talk about for player side of things, and this is just to reinforce what we've been talking about, and we'll kind of conclude with the main takeaway, and then I want to talk about some of the DM stuff. Okay. So one of the things they're going to do with rogues, and this is just absolutely brilliant, your sneak attack dice.
Okay.
Big damage, right? Rogue gets 1 attack, do big damage.
Yep.
What happens if you miss that? Well, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, you wasted your sneak attack.
You wasted your sneak attack. You need advantage. The way they handled sneak attack in 5th ed, brilliant. Because sneak attack was always a super weird thing in the older editions. It's do they see me? No. Okay. Am I behind them? Yes. Okay. And just this whole flow chart of
it was, you had to go if, then, where.
And you're basically begging the DM to just say yes, and then finally the DM's yes, all the calculations are correct. You may double your damage.
You're right.
You're yeah, but it's such just a horrible way to do it. God, there's gonna be some AD&D players who are you're a monster. But it was horrible. I mean, sneak attack in AD&D was just awful.
That was, to be fair, being the AD&D player in the room, to be fair, that was offset with the concept that the rogue and the fighter and everybody else, other than maybe a priest, the rogue would out-level all of them fast.
Yeah.
I mean, the rogue, you'd be in a group with a 5th level fighter, 4th level wizard, 6th level priest, and a 12th level rogue.
I think my problem with sneak attack was that my DMs were just never generous with it.
Right. Oh yeah, no.
Just never. It was always just a lawyering, battering heads to get it.
But that'll be on the DM side of things that we talk about, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
About just how a DM can.
So sneak attack.
Yep.
You can now spend your sneak attack dice to trip opponents.
Oh, nice.
or poison them,
Okay.
or do a bunch of various effects. I believe the Mage Hand, Legitimate, like for the Arcane Trickster, you can actually use your Mage Hand to trip an additional person
Nice.
while you trip with your sneak attack. So it's actually giving the Rogue not more action economy, but better action economy.
Yeah, well, it gets to choose a few more options other than just
And
sneaky deek damage.
ultimately, that's the takeaway that I want to roll into. Like
Right.
this is to just put the nail in the coffin of the
Right.
point that we've been talking about for
Yep.
15 minutes.
We're finally getting back to melee classes and looking at them and saying, "Hey, we need to make these guys fun again."
And make my melee great again, or make melee classes great again,
Yeah,
or whatever.
make melee classes great again.
And you know what? And from what I've seen so far, I haven't delved too far into the specifics of it because I'm sure there's still tweaks or whatever. Well, I'm sure they have everything printed now or on the printing press, whatever.
Right.
I have faith in what my faith has been restored.
Okay.
I will be trying One D&D.
Yeah.
And I was in the park of like D&D
Right.
I'm gonna try it because they seem to be doing a lot of things right on the player side. And,
Yeah.
and
I
that's
mean-
what 5th Ed needed.
And as much money as at least I know I've spent a redonkulous amount of money on this system. I mean, I would hate to be that guy that says I've spent money since first ed on D&D books and then like decided now I'm going to quit.
It's that sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah, it's like,
right?
gosh, now I have to at least try to buy some of it. And if it's good and we play it, then maybe I'll buy more,
Yeah, I definitely will be buying the core rule books. So let's talk about the monster manual just a little bit.
Okay.
They changed the stat blocks and they changed the options that monsters get. It sounds like you'll be able to run monsters in a more organic way that you want to run them as a DM. So you're not just limited to the 2 options on the monster sheet.
Right. So it's going to be... Okay, so I'll just go down this path anyway. So it's going to be a lot like the alternate... Well, I mean, Goblin Press, I think it's Kobold Press,
yeah.
makes the Tome of Beasts,
Yeah.
which I know at least a lot of our DMs have loved that because it takes the average monster. Say, we'll use a dragon, right? Or not even. We'll even go down. We'll even go lower. We'll say
kobolds.
Kobolds. It takes your average kobold in the monster manual here in that we have in 5th Ed basic monster manual, which is really a basic kobold. They have a few options, but that's it. But it gives you this different level, and I know I use it in Dragon Heist or my version of Dragon Heist, because when Dragon Heist was over, we had another version. We just kept going. But I had an invasion army come, and I used Kobold Press kobolds also. And there's levels. Like, there was kobolds, then there was kobold captains and kobold, like, chain whirlers, and it just got better. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this just combines stuff together. And it makes the players, they can't just run out there and just, I'm going to kill the kobold. Okay. But that chain whirler there is going to wrap you up in chains. You get too close.
And it's funny because like the I think it was it Volos that had like the Kobold Inventor and
It could be.
but
yeah.
they did detail out some more and like
Right.
fifth went in that direction and it's funny because 3rd did that,
Yep.
4th kind of did it,
I don't know. Think
a
about
little
fourth,
bit,
yeah.
but 2nd and 1st edition you kind of got like this percentile of like one of them will be a Goblin Chief. And
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
well,
It was
well,
always
what-
everything was.
and it's like, what's a Goblin Chief look like? Well, they have a halberd out of 3%. And you're
Yep.
like, come on, man. Like, just give me the stat block. But,
Right.
like, back then they were kind of like, I think you were more incentivized to, like, make your own stuff.
Yeah, there
Because
was a lot.
It wasn't as, like, commercialized, I guess. I
Yep.
mean, 2nd Ed was, like, where it was getting commercialized. But
Yep.
that's a whole nother.
That was still just a creator's game, not a player's game.
Yeah, it was a DM.
5th Ed is definitely a player's game.
Oh, for sure. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We know we've had this discussion many times.
Yep.
But yeah, it sounds like they're doing the monsters because that was another weak part of 5th Ed is that
Yep.
the monsters didn't have options.
No, once you got to a certain level, I'd say 7th, 8th level, things started tapering out pretty quickly for the monsters.
And like a lot of the stuff that was like used to be really spooky, like spellcasting monsters, kind of pushovers.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
there was
again, if you only cast one spell a turn,
Right.
and the party's casting
5 because
because
everybody
they get
can
one on
cast
their bonus
spells.
action and
You're
they
right.
get one on their normal act.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
I mean,
So-
there's always been a few monsters that you can spook a party with, but it sucks having to rely on a handful of monsters to keep your party in line.
Yeah, it sucks
If
having
that's
to
that-
rely on gotcha.
Yeah.
Oops, you got hit with a finger of death out of nowhere, or death gaze, and
Yeah.
it's like, you're dead now.
Yeah, but
it's
once the players run into that monster, then they're going to know every time. And
Yeah.
They're not going to let you get them every time.
And, like, you know, you want to foreshadow that stuff.
Yeah.
But that goes into DMing tips. We're not talking about that today.
Oh, okay. We're talking about DMing.
You know, well, but, like, it goes into, like, how to run a monster.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
no.
not talking about that today.
Oh, okay. Dang.
So I want to talk about the DMG, because this is the book that got me really excited.
Okay.
I'm going to make a bold statement here.
Uh-oh.
And I'm going to say since first edition, and this is excluding the second edition one, there was some useful stuff in that, but the only truly you had to use it,
Right.
Dungeon Master's Guide ever printed, felt like the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide.
Fair enough.
Because it had, like, rules for stuff that only the DM could use.
Right.
Fifth ed, and like, the DM's guide was literally just like a treasure tome.
Yeah.
And, like,
Essentially.
a treasure generator. That's literally all it was.
Yep.
And it was
That's
so,
pretty much all you use it for in, like, second ed.
And even fifth edition, that kind of felt like all it was good for. Like, the biggest section was magic items. Now, that being said, One D&D, Chris Perkins is like, okay, so the biggest section is magic items. But
Right.
that's a historical thing.
Right.
Got that. Rather than, like, a chapter on how to build your campaign world or how to run a game, they actually give you 5 adventures in the DMG.
Oh.
Like, starter adventures.
Okay.
Brilliant idea.
Yep.
A lot of books do this. A lot of book systems
Right.
and game systems do this. And it's very useful because it shows people how to run a game using your system. You know, rather than having to rely on buying a new module or whatever.
Right.
They also include a full campaign setting, and then, like, how to make your campaign setting based off of that or whatever, add things. And they introduce the idea of, like, a hub. Do you want to know what campaign setting they chose? I'm super excited for this.
Which one?
They chose Greyhawk.
Okay. Which they haven't delved into barely at all.
Not since.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever been technically an official.
I think the only Greyhawk stuff they even mentioned is Mordenkainen Greyhawk.
Mordenkainen is from Greyhawk.
Okay,
yeah.
so that would be about it. I don't think the rest of the stuff that they had in
That's
fifth
Gary
ed is-
Gygax's original world.
Yeah, I don't
so
think
it's very fitting that for the 50th anniversary, that the new release of the new edition,
that makes sense.
they
yeah.
use Greyhawk as the Dungeon Master's Guide
Right.
thing. And so what they do is they mention, like, so the city of Greyhawk,
Yep.
and then they talk about adventures and how to use an adventure hub. So already we're seeing, like, things that are useful and that DMs actually use,
Right, instead of just
like, esoteric, like, what is a role-playing game?
Yeah.
Time. What is time in D&D? Like, all these weird, like you read through a second edition Dungeon Master's Guide, or third or fourth or fifth even, and you're like, it's just dry.
right.
It's just awful.
Well, I think I understand why they put that stuff in there, but I think all that stuff literally can be put in a starter set and called good.
Yeah, or just
I've sold
a slim little book.
I've sold so many starter sets that people are like, how do I start playing? They always want to buy the player's handbook, the Dungeon Master. I said, no, buy the starter set.
Yeah.
You don't need after that. You won't need the player's handbook and the DMG much. I mean, the player's handbook's nice for making characters.
Yeah.
But you don't need the DMG at that point
You
because
just-
you've already know the rules.
It's almost like the DMG has been an optional book for a long time.
Yeah, and all the magic items they put in modules and stuff, they tell you what they do already. I mean, they're not.
You know, in first edition, you needed the DMG because it was all your treasure tables. It was
every monster
psionics,
had
your spells,
X and XB and XY.
your
It's like,
types. It had all your
whoa,
poison types. It had every useful
Yep.
table that you ever needed.
right tables. Yeah,
And so that's why you needed it.
Yeah.
It was literally the reference material. So it already looks like what they're doing with the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, or sorry, the One D&D Dungeon Master's Guide, the 50th anniversary one, it's going to be useful. Like,
Yeah,
you're
that'd
gonna
be nice.
actually want to use it.
right. You're gonna want that book at your table.
Rather than just an item to sit so people can read what their magic item does.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I actually. Even with the magic items, I generally just
When's the last time you opened a Dungeon Master's Guide to, like, use anything out of it.
Oh, maybe is it fifth that it has the anti-paladin in it?
Yeah, so the Oathbreaker.
So that would be
there.
literally,
and that's actually a traditional thing,
right?
Of putting the evil character and the anti whatevers.
But I mean, how often do you use that? Like,
I mean, you just go on D&D Beyond now and just make it that way, right?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah,
you know, but like that's essentially what happens.
Yep.
It becomes irrelevant. So the last thing I want to talk about that's really spicy in the DMG, what is one of the core features of Dungeons and Dragons that we no longer use? Like, what is something of Dungeons and Dragons first and second edition, and even basic, that was just integral to the system? Like, it was so important to how the game functioned. And you might not have used it in your games.
Thaco.
No.
Oh, wait. We made a video about that. Gotcha.
I'll make a statement. When you were a 9th level fighter, you could start doing it. And it was the only reason that, and it made it so charisma wasn't even a dumb stat.
Oh, henchmen?
Followers and strongholds.
Yep.
So there's a whole new section in the DMG for what's called a bastion system.
Right. Okay.
And when Perkins was talking about this, I was like, okay, I'm eating this up. This is great. So apparently the bastion system is a 5th level. You start at 5th level. You start building your bastion. And it's essentially a stronghold for the players. And it is a separate sub-game that the players have agency and control in running.
Right.
And between adventures, the idea is that you take a bastion turn.
Okay.
And so you submit to the DM what you'd like to do with your bastion, and you can kind of manage it in between games. So it gives you something to do.
Right, something to think about in between your sessions.
And there's a lot of games that do stuff like this where they say, hey, here's something that you can do in between game sessions or in between active adventuring.
Right.
And it goes back to now with the bastion system and having a dedicated downtime, we can go back into training. We can go back into making and researching spells and magic items. And making magic items has been revamped too.
Right.
So, thoughts on the bastion? What do you think of having strongholds again?
I think that's a really decent idea. I think that it's been lost in modern, at least in the modern. I shouldn't say all of them, but most of the main. I mean, it especially in D&D, it was gone, And I know when we played one of the other systems, there was or I should say, when the module, the 5th edition translation of I can't think of the module right off the top of my head.
Oh, are you talking Tomb of Annihilation?
No, the Kingmaker.
Oh, for Pathfinder.
Right. Pathfinder switched over, and they made a 5th edition translation of that.
Okay.
And that got my players that were at the time before I stopped playing and stopped DMing when I took my break here. That got them excited because literally in that setting, there is stuff to do, as the DM and as players when they're not playing.
Yeah, so
you're literally building your city.
City building is
that's huge.
Yeah,
and when you mentioned that, I thought, hot dog. They're taking a number, and they're finally just listening. That was huge. That was probably one of Pathfinder's biggest selling modules ever.
Yep.
And for a long time, you could only buy it off eBay for $600 or $700. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
now they finally reprinted it so you can actually get it in 2nd ed and then 5th ed, which is huge. It's still expensive. It's $150, but it's city building, man. Who doesn't want to do that? That's something when you're sitting at work and doing a mindless job, you're like, okay, I play D&D, but I can't think of anything because I have to wait until talk to DM. But if I'm thinking about city building, I can make all these plans. I can text my buddies and we can plan, and the DM doesn't have to be there for it.
And I think you hit the nail on the head of why this is so important. Is that what's one of the bigger problems in D&D is you lose steam, you lose interest, it becomes monotonous, it becomes boring.
Well, there's just nothing to do in off downtime,
and you're not thinking about it when you're not at the table.
No.
Now, when you get to intense stuff, there's spurts of it where it is like that.
Yep.
But giving players a way to be engaged, like you said, like you put it so eloquently.
Yeah.
Like it's brilliant how you put it, because that's exactly why it is important.
Yeah, huge.
I can't even like re-explain it. It's just perfect the way
it makes a difference. I played in a campaign for a long time, the opposite of what I was campaigning, and the guy who was running it made his own world, but it was kind of that same concept. It was more, it wasn't city building, but it was definitely world building. He was using us to world build, and so we'd have to talk about it during off peaks, and that keeps interest going. But when you do city building, it's not like I can participate. It's like I have to participate, because if I just let the other 3 players decide, I'm never going to have my training grounds for my fighter, They're going to build the wizard tower and the rogue house and whatever, the ale house and the whatever, out the brothel.
Yep.
And then we're not going to have a blacksmith. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no one's going to be able to make my plate mail.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited about that for sure.
Yeah, and that's
even if I was not thinking about buying it, I am now.
And that's kind of why I saved it for last, because like
that's huge.
And the idea that that there's, I still want to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But like Bastions, huge plus for me.
Yeah, no, huge.
Fixing melee classes,
Yep.
huge plus for me.
That's a big one.
Giving more options for everybody, huge plus for me.
Yeah.
Like literally everything that I had a gripe with 5th edition, maybe not everything, but a lot of the stuff I'm having gripes with.
Right. Well, they're fixing a lot of loopholes that are not loopholes, but just bugs, we'll say.
And not even just like fixing bugs, but like they're just breathing life into things that needed life breathed into them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like that model, the idea that they're actually caring about the game and not the game's message or whatever.
Yeah, no, right.
Like they just want to make a fun game.
Yeah, and that's the way it's always been. That's the way they need to keep with it.
That's what we needed.
Yeah, we need fun games. We don't need
improve your game, make it more fun.
We don't need anything else in the game. It's
so
just fun.
The thing that's near and dear to my heart, in all of the DMGs, well, not all of them, no, all of them,
right?
Ever since 1st edition, and the thing that's always captivated my brain as a player or as a DM, is the weird cosmological charts in the back that you're like, what does this mean?
Okay.
What is this giant donut on this ring? Are they playing ring toss?
Right.
Like, what is this?
What do we do? Why we drop pictures back here?
And it's like this, just like one paragraph explanations of an entire plane of existence, and you're like, what is it? Like, how do you? And like,
yeah.
It was so much work for DMs to do anything with the planes.
Oh yeah, no, and that's why most people never did.
So Chris Perkins was talking about the planes and the astrology section or
right.
cosmology section of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and he made I don't know if I want to call it a promise,
right?
But he was pitching the idea that it is more fleshed out, and it's actually explained like what you can do on these planes
right.
and why you would go there, rather than just being like you need a whole nother book to do it. So it sounds like the Dungeon Master's Guide is all these nuggets of useful information in addition to rules and systems now that you can use to enhance your game.
Right.
And I have this strong sneaking suspicion that the starter adventures in the Dungeon Master's Guide are going to have a formula of introduce plot.
Yeah.
Do adventure during a long rest or between adventures, mess with Bastion,
yep.
rinse and repeat.
Yep.
And if they can create, we talk about a long time ago game loops,
yep.
and having a fun game loop. If
Right.
D&D can create a meaningful game loop that you can go back to every week, rather than having to rely on a DM to prep and do all this stuff, it's going to be huge.
Right.
I mean, you still like want a DM to prep and all that. Like, you still need a DM. I'm not saying you don't need a DM.
Right.
But I'm saying, like, outside of a DM just planning an encounter, it's
Right.
going to be huge.
Right. Yeah. That's exciting. Can't wait.
Yeah, I've been nothing but happy.
The only problem is now, I got to decide if I want to wait to DM or do I just start it on something else? So.
I'm probably going to DM right away. I'm going to be honest with you.
Because I have a couple things I want to do anyway, but I just now do I wait until the new books come out? When do they come out? September, August, yeah.
Player's Handbook drops in September.
Oh,
and
of course, that's right.
I think everything's released by
By Christmas, isn't it?
by Christmas.
Yeah, I think it's November. I think now that I'm thinking
So,
about it.
but honestly, I'm fine with that. I'd rather they just take the time to release it. Like, I hate when they rush things. Like, I don't want the publisher being like, hey, get this game out so that we can make our money.
No, but I wouldn't mind having released the core set together. I don't like that. Like, I didn't like it when 5th Ed released the Player's Handbook before they released all the other ones anyway, before. So I think the only... Did they have the DMG right away? It was the DMG and the Player's Handbook, and I think the Monster Manual released later. And I'm like, why? Like...
I don't know.
If they're all done, like, just publish them all.
But
I know.
If there's a triple box set and you can get it all at once, I'm probably buying it.
Yeah,
Like,
no, yeah, absolutely. If I can get them at once, that's what I'll do, too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to piecemeal it. I just want it.
So, but yeah, I'm so, like... I'm so hopeful.
Yeah, that would be nice. I would like
And
that.
I have a 2nd Ed campaign. I was gonna run in 2nd edition. I was like, totally, like, set in my mind. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna run 2nd Ed again.
Right.
You know, I'm gonna show all these 5th Ed players. You know,
Right.
Gonna run them through the gauntlet, show them. But at the end of the day, I'm like, from what I'm hearing of this One D&D and what I've been seeing, I'm like, God dang, I might just run it in that.
Yeah. That's still a while out, though, so...
It is, but it gives me time to plan and do all that. So, anyways, this is a long episode.
Yeah, probably.
But
No idea.
We covered a lot of really, really important stuff, I think. One D&D, check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah, no, check it out.
I'm not gonna tell you to buy it. I'm not gonna tell you to play it. But I can tell you as a D&D player of over 10 years, I'm personally gonna play it.
Yeah.
And try it.
Yeah.
And run it and see what it's about.
Well, I mean, yeah, you almost have to try it.
Anyways, that's it for this week.
Till next time.
Catch you later.